All right, welcome to another video review, live and direct with your Akazaki Yahoo. Uh, Call Halal Yahuwah Bahashem Yahushua Hamashiach to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say Shalom, Wa, Baruchim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait till the day that the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation under the Most High power, under one covenant back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Hallelujah. All praises to the Father. Video review we have comes to us from Black Journals. Shout out to those brothers doing great work. This is Christmas on the Slave Plantation, Sombre Reflections, Festive Cruelty. Here we go.
At that time and epoch, when slavery was legal in the United States of America, it was envisaged that the slaves enjoyed a brief respite during Christmas, also known as the Yuletide season. It was also said that this auspicious holiday was often characterized by seasoned and very tasty meals, lots of music, mostly known as Christmas songs, dancing, sometimes, in company with their white neighbors. Is this true, or is this one of those ironic methods used to twist and cover the untold sufferings of African Americans in that dark era? The solemn truth is, Christmas seasons for black slaves generated great anxiety. Slave owners dreaded Christmas acts of resistance against their authority, while enslaved people feared, who also anticipated that there could be violent rebukes of their festive joy at any moment in time. These seasons were, for fact, a troubled past for blacks, while early accounts from white Southerners after the Civil War often painted an idealized picture of owners' generosity met by grateful workers happily feasting, singing, and dancing during Christmas. The reality was far more complex and heart-wrenching, to say the least. During the Yuletide or Christmas seasons, most slaves escaped from their tyrant masters, while others became really afraid of being sold out and equally separated from their families. Yes, they had families, as most of the slaves married each other, reproduced, and had children who automatically became slaves and worked for the same master or in the same neighborhood. But during Christmas, most of these masters sold out their slaves, gave them out as gifts to their friends or well-wishers, or gave them out in payments of their debts. This act instilled so much fear and anxiety in the hearts of these slaves during the Christmas season. Picture yourself in the said horrible situation. What would you do? How would you feel? You just sit tight, as this eye-opening video will be showcasing lots of interesting facts about the unthinkable actions of slaveholders towards their subjects and what the fate of black slaves were in such season of irresistible nostalgia called Christmas. Be kind to hit the thumb button, share with friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and subscribe to settle with us for more revealing videos like this one. Let's get down the brass tracks. Christmas, a time for joy, giving, and celebration, held a vastly different meaning for enslaved black people in the Americas. American slaves experienced the Christmas holidays in many different ways. For other slaves, these holidays conjured up visions of freedom and even the opportunity to bring about that freedom. Still others saw it as yet another burden to be endured. The prosperity and relaxed discipline associated with Christmas during the slave era often enabled slaves to interact in ways that they could not during the rest of the year. But the truth remains that behind the facade of festive cheer, the harsh realities of slavery and racism cast a long, ominous shadow. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Christmas was a rare day of respite for enslaved African Americans. Plantation owners, seeking to maintain control and appease their slaves, would often grant a brief reprieve from the grueling labor. This holiday was a calculated move, designed to reinforce the power dynamics and remind enslaved people of their place. It was all an illusion of liberty, and not liberty in itself. Christmas was the day when these black slaves, male and female, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, were made to dance, strictly to the entertainment of their white slave masters and their mistresses and children. That doesn't seem like anything near the portrayal of liberty to any rational mind. A day wherein they are made to memorably wrestle and fight and violently aim at one another in a fierce combat, one black male slave against the other, to the injury of themselves, is not in any way liberty, but a wicked mockery of it. And this was all done to merely make the pale faces of their plantation owners and families grin. Enslaved people, however, found ways to transform this meager concession into a testament of resilience and hope. They would gather, share what little food they had, and engage in subtle acts of resistance. Through coded songs, dances, and storytelling, they conveyed messages of freedom, solidarity, and defiance. One such example is the tradition of Jonkonu, a masquerade celebration originating from West Africa. Enslaved people in the Caribbean and Americas adapted this tradition, using it as a means to mock their enslavers, critique the system, and assert their cultural identity. Despite these moments of resistance and cultural preservation, Christmas remained a bittersweet time for enslaved people. The pain of separation from loved ones, the ache of lost traditions, and the ever-present threat of violence and punishment hung over them like a specter. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, which allowed slave catchers to pursue and capture escaped slaves in free states, cast an additional pall over Christmas celebrations. Enslaved people lived in constant fear of being torn from their families and communities, even during the supposed season of joy. In this light, there are several historic narratives that cite some very touching experiences of black slaves during Christmas. Here are a few examples. 1. Frederick Douglass's autobiography. In his autobiography, Frederick Douglass recounts the painful experience of being separated from his family during Christmas. He writes, "I was compelled to spend my Christmas holidays in the usual way, in sorrow and in tears." Douglass described the period of respite that was granted to slaves every year between Christmas and New Year's Day as a psychological tool of the oppressor. In his 1845 narrative, Douglass wrote that slaves celebrated the winter holidays by engaging in activities such as playing ball, wrestling, running foot races, fiddling, dancing, and drinking whiskey. He took particular umbrage at the latter practice, which was often encouraged by slave owners through various tactics. One plan was to make bets on their slaves as to who can drink the most whiskey without getting drunk, and in this way, they succeed in getting whole multitudes to drink to excess. In My Bondage and My Freedom, Douglass concluded that all the license allowed during the holidays appears to have no other object than to disgust the slaves with their temporary freedom and to make them as glad to return to their work as they were to leave it. While there is no doubt that many enjoyed these holidays, Douglass acutely discerned that they were granted not merely in a spirit of charity or conviviality, but also to appease those who yearned for freedom, ultimately serving the ulterior motives of slave owners. 2. Charles Ball's slavery in the United States. Charles Ball, a former slave, born on a tobacco plantation in Calvert County, Maryland, recounts the somber Christmas celebration on the plantation where he was enslaved. Mr. Ball writes, "The slaves were allowed to visit their friends, but they were not permitted to absent themselves from the plantation. Christmas was a day of sorrow rather than of joy." Mr. Ball's experience as a slave was a sad and depressing one. When Charles Ball was 4, his mother and siblings were sold to another plantation, and Ball never saw them again. Ball remained in Maryland and married Judah, a slave on a neighboring plantation, but they were separated when he was sold to a slave trader from Georgia. Ball was bound with 51 other slaves in neck irons, handcuffs, and chains, and forced to walk for over a month from Maryland to Columbia, South Carolina. There, he was sold to a cotton plantation owner and later worked for the owner's youngest daughter in Georgia. When his owner died in 1809, Ball found himself at the mercy of the owner's sons, whose cruelty was unbearable. That year, he escaped from slavery, and during the span of a year, walked from Georgia to Maryland. Ball's Slavery in the United States, a narrative of the life and adventures of Charles Ball, was published in 1836. 50 Years in Chains, or The Life of an American Slave, 1859, was an abridged and unauthorized reprinted of the earlier slavery in the United States. In the narratives, Ball describes his experiences as a slave, including the uncertainty of slave life and the ways in which the slaves are forced to suffer harsh and inhumane conditions. In particular, he recounts the qualities of his various masters and the ways in which his fortune depended on their temperament. 3. Harriet Jacobs's Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, Formerly enslaved Harriet Jacobs, author of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, recounts the cruel treatment she once received from her enslaver during Christmas. She writes,
"The slave's Christmas was a day of sorrow, not of joy. The slave's heart was heavy with grief."
Harriet Jacobs, in her 1861 citation, recalled the delight that enslaved children in Edenton, North Carolina, took in the enslaved Christmas festivities there, central to which were the John Cooner parades. John Cooners were troops of slaves and free blacks, brightly dressed and often masked, who sang and danced on Christmas and New Year's Day in the Wilmington, Lower Cape Fear, and Albemarle Sound areas throughout much of the 1800s. The custom closely paralleled the annual John Canoe celebrations that survive today in Jamaica and the Bahamas. In Wilmington, where newspapers regularly reported the practice through the 1850s, as many as 8 to 10 groups of Cooners, who were all men that kept their identities secret, some with 20 members each, went from house to house, singing and beating rhythms with rib bones, cow's horns, triangles, and mouth harps. Harriet Jacobs did, however, made mention in her 1861 citation that a John Cooner did order enslaved men to organize themselves into a parade, dress themselves in oftentimes garish and animalistic garb, and process to enslavers' houses within the local vicinity, where they would perform a dance and then expect victuals, liquor, and money in return. Jacobs depicted the annual John Cooner parades in terms that suggested much about the inversion of racial power and privilege in the slaveholding South at Christmas time. Jacobs had also further broached the illusions of the intimacies of the Christmas festivities, which for several were often shattered by the inevitable grieving over separation of family members through this annual routine of labor requirements and pursuit of profit. This did serve as a stark reminder that the enslaved were ultimately subject to the enslaver's power and purse, no matter the freedoms extended to them over Christmas. 4. The narrative of William Wells Brown. William Wells Brown, a former slave, recounts the painful experience of being sold away from his family during Christmas. He writes,
"I was sold to a trader and taken to the city of St. Louis. I was separated from my mother and never saw her again."
The list could just go on, with endless narratives providing a glimpse into the sad and cruel experiences of black slaves during Christmas. In the 1830s, the large slaveholding states of Alabama, Louisiana, and Arkansas became the first in the United States to declare Christmas a state holiday. It was in these southern states and others during the antebellum period, ranging from 1812 to 1860, that many Christmas traditions which entailed giving gifts, singing carols, decorating homes, firmly took hold in American culture. Many enslaved workers got their longest break of the year, which was, ironically, only a handful of days, and some were granted the privilege to travel to see family or get married. Many received gifts from their owners and enjoyed special foods, untasted the rest of the year. But while many enslaved people partook in some of these holiday pleasures, Christmas time could be treacherous. According to Robert E. May, a professor of history at Purdue University and author of Yuletide in Dixie, Slavery, Christmas, and Southern Memory, has this to say:
Owners' fears of rebellion during the season sometimes led to preemptive shows of harsh discipline. Their buying and selling of workers didn't abate during the holidays, nor did their annual hiring out of enslaved workers, some of whom would be shipped off away from their families on New Year's Day, widely referred to as Heartbreak Day.
For slave owners, gift-giving connoted power. Christmas gave them the opportunity to express their paternalism and dominance over the people they owned, who almost universally lacked the economic power or means to purchase gifts. Owners often gave their enslaved workers things they withheld throughout the year, like shoes, clothing, and money. According to Texas historian Elizabeth Silverthorne, one slaveholder from that state gave each of his families $25. The children were given sacks of candy and pennies.
Christmas Day, we gave out our donations to the servants. They were much pleased, and we were saluted on all sides with grins, smiles, and low bows,
wrote one Southern planter. Stephen Nissenbaum, in his book titled The Battle for Christmas, recounts how a white overseer considered giving gifts to enslaved workers on Christmas a better source of control than physical violence. "I killed 28 heads of beef for the people's Christmas dinner," he said. "I can do more with them in this way than if all the hides of the cattle were made into lashes. The details of these Christmas events varied widely, of course, from plantation to plantation in the country and from house to house in urban centers. This merriment coincided with religious celebrations of the anniversary of the birth of Jesus, but their mirth did not necessarily flow from spiritual fervor. Before and after the widespread Christianization of African captives in the American South, their Christmas festivities celebrated survival and fellowship in the face of great adversity. During this season, which was a rare one that came annually, slaves frequently married during the Christmas season. When Dice, a female slave and Nina Hill Robinson's Aunt Dice, came to her master one Christmas Eve and asked his consent to her marriage with Caesar, her master allowed the ceremony, and a great feast was spread. Dice and Caesar were married in the mistress's own parlor, before the white minister. More than any other time of the year, Christmas provided slaves with the latitude and prosperity that made a formal wedding possible. Some slaves saw Christmas as an opportunity to escape. They took advantage of relaxed work schedules and the holiday travels of slaveholders who were too far away to stop them. While some slaveholders presumably treated the holiday as any other workday, numerous authors record a variety of holiday traditions, including the suspension of work for celebration and family visits. Because many slaves had spouses, children, and family who were owned by different masters and who lived on other properties, slaves often requested passes to travel and visit family during this time. Some slaves used the passes to explain their presence on the road and delay the discovery of their escape through their master's expectation that they would soon return from their family visit. Jermaine Logan, a black slave, plotted a Christmas escape, stockpiling supplies and waiting for travel passes, knowing the cover of the holidays was essential for success.
Lord, speed the day. Freedom begins with the holidays.
Jermaine was known to always say. These plans turned out to be wise eventually, as Logan and his companions were almost caught crossing a river into Ohio, but were left alone because the white men thought they were free men who had been to Kentucky to spend the holidays with their friends. They had their travel passes. Harriet Tubman had helped her brothers escape at Christmas. Their master intended to sell them after Christmas, but was delayed by the holiday. The brothers were expected to spend the day with their elderly mother, but met Tubman in secret. She helped them travel north, gaining a head start on the master who did not discover their disappearance until the end of the holidays. Likewise, William and Ellen Crafts escaped together at Christmas time. They had taken advantage of passes that were clearly meant for temporary use.
Ellen obtained a pass from her mistress, allowing her to be away for a few days.
William had said,
"The cabinet maker with whom I worked gave me a similar paper, but said that he needed my services very much and wished me to return as soon as the time granted was up. I thanked him kindly, but somehow I have not been able to make it convenient to return yet. And as the free air of good old England agrees so well with my wife and our dear little ones, as well as with myself, it is not at all likely we shall return at present to the peculiar institution of chains and stripes."
These were the honest words of William Craft. Many enslaved people spent the holidays worrying about getting sold or faced violence like whippings. Some, like Henry Bibb, picked Christmas Day in 1837 to escape to freedom. In his 1849 memoirs, he writes about deciding to make a bolt for liberty or consent to die a slave by paddling across the river from Kentucky to Ohio after his plantation owner gave enslaved persons some time around the holiday to work for themselves. In the South, the slave owners panicked and lived in fear. These panics often occurred over Christmas time because the God of white people was down. Southern whites knew that there was a history of slave insurrections coming from the Caribbean and South America. Some of the worst insurrections of all time occurred over Christmas in places like Jamaica. White planters who owned scores, hundreds, or in a few cases even thousands of slaves wrote in their own private diaries that they resented giving them time off at Christmas at all. Another thing that's never pointed out in these fictional accounts later is that a large percent of enslaved people were rented on one-year contracts and often allowed to return home to their original master on Christmas. On January 1st, they would be rented out again, and the master would pick out their new employer. Even if they were given good feasts and good presents, enslaved people had to spend the whole Christmas period worrying about January 1st, whether their new employer would be someone who would whip them a lot or would abuse them in other ways. There were even cases of masters and mistresses giving enslaved people as Christmas gifts to family members and to their children. Louis Hughes, who escaped from enslavement and later in life published an autobiography entitled 30 Years a Slave, recalled in his book how he had literally been presented by his purchaser as a gift to his wife on Christmas Eve. Tuskegee Institute principal Robert Russa Moton, one of the leading black educators in the U.S. in the early 20th century, remembered being a child in Prince Edward County, Virginia, and having to watch his father being conferred as a Christmas present during an estate settlement. And LaSalle Corbell Pickett, the widow of George Pickett, the famed Confederate general who led Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, claims in her own memoirs that her present one year was a 6-week-old black baby boy, accompanied by a deed that made him mine. As anti-slavery sentiment grew stronger in the northern states during the second quarter of the 19th century, Southern defenders of the institution began describing boisterous Christmas festivities as an example of slavery's benign nature. To this end, many slave owners transformed mundane transactions into spectacles, choreographed to highlight their paternalistic generosity. Fresh meat, for example, was not part of the regular diet afforded to enslaved people, although their meager rations might include salt-cured meat and fish during the year. At Christmas, however, plantation owners across the South provided cattle or hogs for enslaved people to butcher and prepare for their communal meals. Similarly, enslaved people generally received one suit of clothing each year. On many plantations, the annual distribution of new clothes and shoes became a solemn Christmas ceremony designed to underscore the dependence of the enslaved people on their owner's bounty. Numerous documentary sources from the 18th and 19th centuries confirm that most enslaved African Americans enjoyed only a brief respite from hard labor during the Christmas season. The duration of their holiday varied greatly from region to region and among individual plantations. Some slave owners allowed their chattel servants a day of rest, while others suspended the normal routine of work for the entire week between Christmas and New Year's Day. A 3-day holiday seems to have been the standard across South Carolina, commencing on December 24th and concluding on the evening of the 26th. This brief holiday respite was not entirely free of obligations, however. Across the American South, laborers, enslaved and free, were still obliged to perform a number of routine chores at Christmas. Farm animals had to be fed and tended, for example. Fresh water had to be drawn from wells and toted indoors. Ashes collected from fireplaces and discarded. Chamber pots emptied. Firewood stacked and fires stoked. Coal shoveled. Animals butchered. Victuals prepared. Meals served, babies nursed, and so on. Only the wealthiest people enjoyed a holiday of complete leisure. In most parts of the Old South, South Carolina included, enslaved people who worked without pay during the year could earn cash at Christmas. While their normal duties were suspended, they generally received wages for extra work during their holiday free time. This voluntary practice functioned both as a seasonal reward to the industrious and as a measure of control. Those inclined to work diligently for cash during the Christmas holiday were less likely to abuse the temporary relaxation of the normal rules. Although enslaved people in South Carolina might have appeared happy at Christmas, especially in the presence of those who kept them in bondage, they could scarcely forget the daily threats of corporal punishment and family separation that abridged their liberty. Their holiday jubilation masked a general longing for freedom and prosperity that festered during the rest of their days. The underlying point of all this is, for the people of African descent living in bondage on rural plantations or in urban households in the Americas, Christmas was a season of both joy and fear. They might have been thankful for the miracle of life and family, but the law of the land and the watchful eye of white authorities always constrained their happiness. In closing, as we reflect on the complex, painful history surrounding Christmas and slavery, we honor the resilience and strength of enslaved people. Their stories, traditions, and acts of resistance serve as a powerful reminder of the ongoing struggle for freedom, equality, and justice. As you celebrate this Christmas wherever you are, remember the somber yet resilient spirit of enslaved people. May their stories guide us toward a more compassionate, equitable world where freedom, justice, and joy are available to all. Every life has a story, and every community has a history. If you're gathering with friends and family during the holiday season, I encourage you to share a few stories and listen to those of us.
All right, we're going to stop right there because I'm not encouraging anybody to do anything for this pagan ritual, because this is not for our people. This is for the heathen. And Jeremiah chapter 10 and verse 1 says, don't deal like the heathen deal. Don't fool like the heathen fool, because they do things that's not conducive for us. We're not the same, so we can't operate in the manner that they operate. Matter of fact, let's go to it real quick. Hear you the word of Yahuwah spake unto you, O house of Israel. Thus saith Yahuwah, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of Shamaim, for the heathen are dismayed at them. So do not learn the way of the heathen, because the way of the heathen is not the way of Israel. We are a set apart people. We're not to do these pagan customs, these pagan rituals, and these are wicked things in the eyes of our power. And that's not for us to do. So keep that in mind. Most High willing, I'm gonna find some other videos. None of this on this channel, none of this is to promote the celebration of this wicked stuff. We are against the celebration of all of this foolishness for the children of Israel, for the 12 tribes scattered to the four quarters of the earth. We are against that, wholly and completely. All right, so look, watch for that as we continue through this wicked day. Well, through this day that is turned into wickedness by the adversary, our adversaries. And why is Yaka against this so much? Because my prayer, brethren, and my heart's desire is that to the Most High, to Ha'ava, is that Israel may be saved. I want anybody of Israel to perish after going through this captivity, after all that we've been through, after all the negative effects that we've had. I don't want to see any of us destroyed. I know some of us are going to be destroyed, but I don't want to see any of us destroyed. I want us all to make it to the other side in the kingdom, to have our righteous face put on and everything put in proper order. So we'll go ahead and close out this video here with Ecclesiastes chapter number 12 and verse number 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It is so very important that we understand that in the conclusion of the whole matter, we are to fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. At the end of the day, when it is all said and done, all the dust is settled, and all the smoke is cleared, we will be judged on whether we have feared the Most High and kept his commandments, because this is the whole duty of man. I am your Akazaki Yahu, giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahuwah Bahashem, Yahushua HaMashiach, and to the 12 tribes of Israel, who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say Shalom, Wa Baruki, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait till the day that the Most High brings us back together, and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High Power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Until that day come, shalom, family. Peace and blessings.